basically I grew up in what would be called an ethnic enclave of French-speaking Canadian Americans. And we never knew anything but Oblates. The parish that I belonged to was the famous Saint Jean-Baptiste. They tell me that at the height of that, there were 60,000 members of that parish living in tenements within, I don't know, a 4 or 5 square block area. And so we had our own school, taught in French by nuns. We also had church, upstairs, downstairs, high school. It was a self-contained entity. I can even remember when we would take the bus to come downtown, we were always told, don't speak French on the bus. It was too much of an enclosure to, so we would not speak at all because we could pass as Irish or whatever, just if we shut our mouths. And so it was that kind of a situation. And everything revolved around the parish, the church, Mass on Sunday, going to the grammar school taught by the nuns, and they would shepherd us into church for Mass on Sunday as well. All the holy days was all done in church, the Triduum, all of that stuff. So we were kind of immersed in that Catholic culture, which was Franco-American at that time. They tell me that at its height, there were 22 Oblates living in the rectory at Saint Jean-Baptiste. And so that's how I got to know the Oblates, the only priests I ever knew. And they were all kind of impressive guys, I thought, a nice mix of younger guys and older guys. And they all spoke well, So that was my first exposure and only exposure to Oblates. And then when it came time to make a decision, I would say that took place maybe in my sophomore year of high school. And again, there were Oblates who would visit the high school and regularly once a month come in and give a class or other. Got to know 1 or 2 of them. And at the time that I decided to join the Oblates, the family had moved out of Little Canada, which was beginning to disassemble itself. Urban renewal was starting to take place. And so we moved across the river to Centerville and belonged to a diocesan parish, Saint Louis de France parish. And so when it came time to join the Oblates, they said, well, the protocol was that if you lived in a parish that belonged to the northern province, the Saint Jean-Baptiste province, you would be going to the seminary system that they had. If you lived in a parish that belonged to the eastern Irish American province, you would go to their seminary formation program. I happened at the time to be living in neither. I was living in a diocesan parish, so it was my choice. And one thing I heard about the formation program in the northern province, at least in the early years, you had to send your laundry home for your mother to wash. And that turned me off big time. I said to myself, I've been doing my own laundry since I was in high school. They had these special boxes that you would put your clothes in and send home for your mother to wash. Talk about not cutting the apron strings. It struck me that way. But then they said, oh, but you get a lot of care packages when the boxes come back. There's food in there and stuff. Again, it struck me as an oddity, and I said, no, I don't want any part of that. So I contacted the vocation recruiter for the Eastern Province and went on a come and see 2-week, or was 1-week thing in Newburgh, New York, which was the house of formation for the junior rate. And that was a good fit. And I said, that's the way I'm going to go. And so I did. In terms of the cultivation of the vocation itself, I'd have to say that I had a mentor in St. Joseph's High School, a Marist brother, and he was saying to me, you got to find ways to improve your vocabulary. So this would have been like in the sophomore year. He says, why don't you get a subscription to a Catholic magazine, and read that. And so I got a subscription to America magazine. And every time I come across a word I didn't know, I would write it down and look it up and put it back in context. So, but at the same time, as I was reading America magazine, the Second Vatican Council was in session. And this was exciting stuff. Talk about breaking out of that little enclave. Suddenly the whole church was changing, and this became fascinating to me. And I said to myself, wow, this is worth looking into. And so it was at that point in the sophomore year of high school that I decided to look into the priesthood, and obviously funneled through the eastern province of the Oblates, the English-speaking province. But it's strange that it came about that way. It was in an attempt to build up vocabulary that finally exposed me to something outside, that really interested me. And I was always, interested in the church because that was our world, So that's how that came about. And once you got to the junior rate, you bonded with the guys who were there. It's an experience of community none of us would ever have had, short of that. It's analogous, I think, to Paris Island for Marines. You know, they bond with those guys, even though they don't all make it through, they bond. And we did, and got a good experience of community there, and then just followed the courses, so all the way up from there to the novitiate, and then to Washington. Coming out of the junior rate, and the first 2 years in Washington, had a bachelor's degree with a major in philosophy. And then you went on to graduate theology. I did 1 year of graduate theology in Washington, and then they said, we would like for you to go to Rome for the remaining 3. I said, all right, why not? So I went over there and finished the graduate theology program, came back, was ordained a deacon in Rome, and then came back, 1974, was ordained a priest in the crypt church of the Basilica of the National Shrine in Washington.